The other group was women's groups, and the main thing that the women's groups wanted was the vote. They did not have the right to vote. Here you can see them talking to the President of the United States. So this is they're protesting outside the White House about how long they have waited for suffrage, and suffrage means the right to vote. Um, they were also concerned about family and home issues like education and health care. A lot of times women would get into issues about workplace safety because their husbands were going off to these places. A lot of times women who were married had worked in factories before they got married, so they had other concerns too, but the main concern was the right to vote. Florence Kelley, who you see a picture of right here, she was a organizer in Illinois, a real rebel rouser who helped pass laws in Illinois concerning child labor, the length of a woman's workday, and sweatshop, which are usually the shops where they were making things. They're called sweatshops because they rarely got breaks and worked long hours, and the conditions in these sweatshops. So she was sort of a early hero for the women's rights movement. Mother Jones, whose whose husband and son died in the mines, became an organizer for unions and a national speaker, and she became real famous too. So these were two early leaders of the women's rights movement. In terms of legislation, the government began to expand its role of what it could do and what it was responsible for. Began to create conditions to make standards of living better for people by, and here you can see some shanties in that time period, by helping make utilities available to houses, by making the trash pickup available, by zoning laws. They began to help the living conditions of the poor. Cities began to reform their political system to make it fair and less corrupt. They began to provide social welfare, which meant they began to provide food to poor people. They also began to guarantee the right for all children to go to school. States began to make voting easier to get to. They began to make the workplace a safer place to work in. Wisconsin's Robert La Follette, who you see here, was an early leader of the progressive movement and became governor of Wisconsin and then later senator from Wisconsin. But the big reformer for the progressive era was Teddy Roosevelt, who became president of the United States, Republican president. He had something called the Square Deal. Square Deal means fair deal. And his Square Deal meant he was going to break up the monopolies or the trusts. He was going to regulate the railroads to make it fair. He was going to improve the conditions for workers, improve the health of the country, and he was going to be the first president to set aside huge tracts of lands to create our National Park Service. And that's the end of that lecture.